In a Zoom call about mental health, California Governor Gavin Newsom recounted a time when he was in Target and saw someone walk out without paying. The Target employee later blamed Newsom for his stealing.
As we're checking out, the woman says, "Oh, he's just walking out. He didn't pay for that." I said, "Well, why didn't you stop him?" She goes, "Oh, the governor." Swear to God, true story. And my mom's great. The governor lowered the threshold. There's no accountability. Well, we don't stop him because of the governor. And then she looks at me twice, and then she freaks out. She calls everyone over, wants to take a photo.
Meanwhile, a Trump administration official was shot in Washington, D.C. earlier this week amid a carjacking spree. Mike Gill, who served as chief operating officer of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission under the Trump administration, is in critical condition in the hospital after being shot while picking his wife up from work on K Street in downtown D.C., just a few blocks from this studio. According to the Washington Post, after shooting Gill, the same man is believed to have conducted at least 2 carjackings and 1 attempted carjacking, and the victim of one of them has died.
D.C. Attorney General Brian Schwab weighed in on the crime wave sweeping the nation's capital. Let's watch.
We as a city and a community need to be much more focused on prevention and surrounding young people and their families with resources if we want to be safer in the long run. We cannot prosecute and arrest our way out of it.
Finally, D.C. using the data on how to address crime in the city, but I don't know, that guy, that was a commodities future trader, dangerous business. Who knows if it was organized or random? But I kind of like this approach. It seems to be the right approach to me, given that the data shows that when people are comfortable, have access to resources, are receiving a good education, have a stable job, is that they don't commit crimes as much. And so as a city, you've got to focus on being a flourishing city because, you know, he said we cannot arrest and prosecute our way out of this. I think he's right. That punishment can't be the solution here. It needs to be a much longer term root source solution.
Were you being serious about the Trump official being a target, or was that a joke?
Commodities future trading, that is a dangerous business. Yeah. I do believe it's a very dangerous business.
Were you joking about that being the reason why he was killed during a carjacking, though?
Oh, I don't believe he was shot during a carjacking. That guy was shot on his way to pick up his wife. But we never know in the case of a shooting if it's premeditated, if there's a motivation here, or if it was a random act.
Right. So what happened is that he was in the car in the driver's seat picking up his wife from work, and a man came into the passenger side and shot him in pursuit of stealing his vehicle. The guy managed to get out of the car and collapsed on the sidewalk, and the suspect fled on foot, where he went on to then carjack 3 other people. In fact, the incident immediately following, he shot a male individual with his girlfriend, took his car keys, but then I guess after shooting him decided to flee. Then he stole 2 more cars that evening. He was eventually killed himself because he decided at the end of his carjacking spree to shoot at police officers, and they fired upon him and killing him. So this Trump official was a part of the carjacking spree. It was not a targeted killing. This was a completely random event. He's still fighting for his life in the hospital. But I find it rich what the Attorney General Brian Schwab is saying there. I mean, I agree that obviously to reduce crime, you should try to address root causes, but that takes a long time. And we don't have time to spare right now with the issues that we're having in Washington, D.C. When you actually look at reporting that's been done on the spree of teen carjackings in this city, they are quite clear about their reasons for doing it. It's not about poverty or broken homes or not being in school. They do it because it's fun, because it's a thrill, and because they know that they're not going to be held accountable for it. There were other people on that panel. In fact, there was a foster dad whose last name was McGilly, and he talked about the fact that 2 of his foster children were involved in carjackings because the teen groups in this city have decided that it's a fun way to spend an evening. One of his sons was arrested by police outside of his house after one particularly bad spree, and then the police dropped the charges. And he urged the other people on that panel to hold these kids accountable for what they're doing, rather than just focus on prevention, you have to also focus on punishment after they do commit a bad act. And unfortunately, these are not victimless crimes. You're ending up with hundreds of people who are dealing with the trauma of having a gun pointed to their head simply for the crime of driving around their city where their officials and their police are supposed to protect them. So I think bare minimum, you have to say that these kids should face some accountability. The biggest deterrent of crime is the certainty of getting caught, and then a range of things related to punishment in terms of both the swiftness of punishment, the severity of punishment, and the certainty of punishment. It's quite clear that these people would not continue to carjack if they knew that they were going to get caught and potentially face some kind of accountability if they were caught.
What do you think the solution is, Amber?
I just said you should hold them accountable.
So what does that mean?
It means a range of things. It could mean a short amount of jail time, community service with a fine for a first offense, potentially a longer sentence if you're found to be a repeat offender, which most of these people are. I think if you're at the point in your life where you're holding a gun up to somebody's head while they're driving around in their car and doing it 5+ times a night because you think it's fun to take a car, drive it a block, and then post it on TikTok as a member of the Kia Boys, then absolutely you should be serving some jail time. That's a violent criminal act. I don't know why we're treating this like it's no big deal or like these kids are just lost on their way. There's plenty of people in our country who are raised in all kinds of terrible circumstances who don't go on to hurt other people as an excuse.
I like how you paint DC like it's just one big GTA lobby and that people are carjacking for fun. I don't know. I feel like people don't pursue a life of crime because it's fun. I feel like people get involved in crime because they're in desperate situations. Maybe some of them end up finding some joy in what they end up doing with their time, find a thrill in doing carjackings. But I don't know. Maybe it's people who are playing GTA and they genuinely think it's fun and, you know, it's very exciting to steal cars. But I think most of them are in a position where they're doing carjackings, they're doing burglaries because they need money and because the price of cars have gone up so much. And, you know, we've seen used car truck salesmen increase their profit tremendously. Their markup once they get to the lot is very high. We also saw the price of cars going up during the pandemic, of course, because of the lack of microchips. But I think all in all, what we're seeing here is the result of the city kind of degrading because of a lack of investment in working people and working communities and having good paid jobs and protections against workers being exploited. I think, you know, it would be very ignorant to assume that most of the crimes committed in the United States are just for fun, that the carjackings in DC are just a bunch of guys who like playing GTA and want to make it real. I think most of the time it's people who need the money that they ultimately get from selling the car. And that's an unfortunate reality, but the data really shows that when someone's in a more desperate economic situation, they have a propensity to commit crimes. And that's true not just of DC. Thankfully, outside of DC, we've seen crime go down nationally, and carjacking's the only stat where it's up. So hopefully, you know, with longer term solutions, we can address some of the crime that we're seeing in the country, but very good to see that violent crime metrics, especially in America's 5 largest cities, are down.
Yeah, DC is GTA, unfortunately, and it's not ignorant to talk about it for what it is. It is exactly what is happening, that kids are following social media trends and getting a kick out of stealing cars. They're not actually, most of them are not selling the cars. They actually end up abandoning the cars a few blocks down the road, a few miles down the road, and then they carjack another one. I mean, these individuals are legitimately going on sprees, stealing 4 or 5 cars in an evening, and then just abandoning it when they get bored of it to try to find some upgrade. And this is not me saying this. I'm not just, projecting my feelings about what's happening on DC. First of all, I've lived here for a decade. I've been following the reporters who are talking about this issue, some of whom, by the way, are very left-wing and don't support my plan of just putting people in jail or holding them accountable when they commit crime. But even on that panel, you had those public officials who are all Democrats talking about this problem and being quite clear, outside of what Brian Schwab said in that small clip, that they do believe that this is a game to these kids. This is not about them stealing a car because they need it to drive to work, or stealing a car because they can sell it for a few $1,000s. They are actually doing this for sport. They're having a good time of it. They go out at night, some of them multiple times a week. They steal 3 or 4 cars, and they are smoking weed or playing loud music or having a good time with one another, and then going back home and acting like it was no big deal. I mean, this is a legitimate trend that you can find all kinds of reporting on in DC, whether it's the crime statistics. There's been articles from the New York Times, the Washington Post, DCist, Fox 5 DC, about the trend of carjackings and what's driving it, as well as these statements from public officials. So it's not my opinion that this is what is happening. It is what is happening.
It's interesting. You said social media. I haven't seen anything on social media. Is that how you know they're going home like nothing's happening? They're doing it for fun. They're smoking weed. Are they vlogging their activities?
I'm saying that the trend comes from TikTok. It's called Kia Boys or Hyundai Boys. It has, as far as I know, millions of views and has become quite prevalent across the country. It's especially prevalent in DC because the kids know that they're not going to be held accountable or even potentially be caught if they go through this. But yes, a lot of them do take videos of their deeds. There's also street surveillance cameras around the city, and we've seen how people are carjacked and then their car is abandoned 2 blocks later. The kids run off laughing into the night. So yeah, there is data, there is evidence of this happening.
I'm not sure it describes every single carjacking we're seeing, because in many cases they're not getting their vehicle back. The vehicle is taken and it's stripped for parts. So I can understand this being maybe a few videos of this, but I really don't think this describes the uptick in carjacking we've seen as it correlates with the price of vehicles. And I heard you mention, there are members of a panel that were left wing that see this the same way as you because they're Democrats. Many Democrats are not left wing. Democrats, if you ask any leftists, are pretty right wing, pretty center. So I don't know. In this situation of the carjacking spike in DC, I'm not particularly concerned about it because I think once we see the price of vehicles go down.
Well, it's easy to not be concerned if you're not the person having a gun pointed at your head for driving to work.
The national
this is ridiculous.
On crime, which we've seen go down. I'm not going to let you interrupt me when I have something to say in response. But we've seen the national crime statistics go down. So I think sometimes reporting on this so much gives people a false perspective that we are seeing a huge spike in all kinds of violent crimes and the cities are very dangerous. I've walked through the streets of DC quite a bit and haven't seen anything. So I don't know. It kind of feels like we're focusing on the one stat that's up when there are a lot of stats that are down.
Yeah, because it matters to people who live here when they can't drive or park on the street because they're worried about, 1, their car being stolen, or 2, a gun pointed at their head and being forced out of their car. That's a traumatizing event for people, and I don't understand why we're acting like the people who are committing the violent crime are the victims more than the people who are being subject to that violent crime.
Never said they're victims of a crime. I said, they're living in a city where it is true that most working people in America are living paycheck to paycheck. They're struggling to get by, and the data shows time and again through the last century or so that in situations that are economically struggling, we see crime go up. It's just a proven empirical fact.
Right, but most working people don't resort to violent crime in order to make themselves feel better about their situation or try to glean some money from their situation. But even just going back, I mean, you said that I was painting all carjackings as this. I'm not saying that. There are certainly cases where cars in DC are stolen and then stripped for parts or sold. In fact, there was a ring of car thefts where the cars were then taken to Baltimore and shipped out of the port for cash. Understand that. That's a criminal enterprise, essentially. But the vast majority are indeed done by teenagers, and the teenagers are not taking the cars to sell. They are dropping them off a few blocks down the road, abandoning them, and then going on to continue their spree. But I think we should continue talking about this because this is an important issue for people who live in the nation's capital. I think it's fair to say that the nation's capital should not be a place where people have to be worried about being stopped at a stoplight and potentially becoming the victim of a random crime. There were over 900 carjackings last year. That's an average of 3 every single day. Right now, we're on pace for about 500 to 600 this year. A lot of our viewers live in DC because this is fundamentally a show about politics and what happens in DC, as well as other things too, but a lot of viewers are in DC, so I think that this is important to them. But we'll be back with more Rising after this.